the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and don't reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, right, Sarah?
Correct.
Any of the, quote, fire content, I prefer lava content, provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are the opinion and are not intended to malign a religion, a group, a club, an organization, business individual, anyone or anything, unless, Sarah?
You're a douchebag.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Also, we're not doctors, psychologists, or wizards. We're just two non-experts trying to make you a friendly, informative podcast based on our experience that we've turned into wisdom. Okay?
Good talk.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story. We met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So there's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM. Still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the wind of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Welcome back to part 2 of 2 with our 3 guests, Alberta Main-Bly, Brooke Henderson, and Aaron Boyes. And just as a reference, this particular teacher is almost identical to all the other teachers that different people in our audience have written to us.
Elements of them.
Yeah, including Candace Silver and a number of different programs and teachers, specifically in LA and New York, but definitely there are rampant in Vancouver, also any city. Enjoy part 2 with our fabulous guests. Okay, who wants to go first? What were the final straws, the things on the shelf that made it so heavy it finally cracked?
So I'm going to try and make this short. I did a play in Toronto with studio members. And at the time, Michelle was in Los Angeles. I did a play and she wanted to give me notes every day. So she was directing me via whatever it was, Skype, I guess at the time, giving me notes that I thought were to help the play. But what that was actually doing was I was being weaponized against the other actor that was in the play because there was a love triangle feud. She didn't like this other actress. And so I was getting notes that were, I guess, collateral is what some cults would call them. She was telling me to do things against this actor that were her darkest, scariest things. So it was about her voice, I guess. So I would do these acting exercises thinking that I was making the play better, but I was actually hurting this actress. Really strange. So I had a very tough time working with this group professionally. It was essentially an equity co-op show. We were doing this show and it was a mess. It was the craziest show I'd ever done. There was so much drama. It was so bizarre. When that wrapped, I was then going to Los Angeles to produce another show back to back for Michelle. And those actors came as well. And as soon as I got into the studio, I felt like I was the other person. I was on the wrong side of the team. I did something wrong. All I did was execute the notes that she was giving me. And I thought I was, trying to do good work. No, I did something wrong. And then she was penalizing me, brutalizing me from the very beginning when I got to town. And then when we had these rehearsals outside, the entire ensemble of the play were sitting around a circle in her apartment, and she brutalized me until the sun went down. She was telling me that I was making the room unsafe and I was causing her physical pain, and I was the reason that she was in pain and needed to go to the hospital. It was my fault because I was in resistance and I was making everything bad. When in actuality, I came there and I achieved whatever it was she wanted me to do, which was to hurt this other actress. So I did my job, and then she wrangled them back into her fold. It's hard to say it without getting into detail. This man was one of the first students that she had groomed, and he was like her personal driver and best friend. And he ended up getting married to another student. So it caused this weird conflict. And she hated this other woman because she took the student away from her. So I was used to brutalize this student by saying notes about her voice in character. And then when they all got back and everything was beautiful between them, I was the asshole. And I was then brutalized and I was treated very strange. And Aaron was there at the time. It was a horrible situation to be in because I'm in Los Angeles with, producing a play, whatnot. And I'm just being told how horrible I am. And my best friend was in the room while it was happening, and she was shaking. And she afterwards, after this sun going down brutalization session, she was like, I wanted to throw her out the window. She was being so terrible to you. And I was like, look, we're in a really bad situation, but I've already left in my mind. We're just going to do this play and then get out. I'm going to get my money back. I'm going to recoup this play money and we're done, because this is insane.
Can I ask one thing? What made it different this time that you were done versus, oh, there's something wrong with me, I've got to be better?
I don't think that I was really brutalized to that level before. And I think that it was because in my case, I always had something to offer. I had this boyfriend that was producing movies. So she wasn't going to fuck with me that much because I had something to offer. And then there was the weaponizing me to hurt another student. I accomplished that. So I wasn't really needed. And then I was down there in another environment in Los Angeles. I was down there with that group, had nothing else going on. So I was already there and in it 100%. And so I think that she just had the ability to abuse me much further than she had before. And I just remember sitting there in this, she, constantly abused, brutalized one student after another. And I'm sitting in this auditorium or in this black box theater, and I'm looking around, and we're in Los Angeles, and it's all Canadians minus 3 or 4 people. Everyone is from Canada. Most of the people are paying rent up there, paying rent down here, paying money for this class. And we're all sitting there being told that we're not worthy and that we're causing her physical pain because her hip was flaring up at the time or something. And we were all being blamed for it because we didn't know our lines, because we weren't going for it. I just remember thinking this is complete bullshit. We're all putting so much into being here. How dare you talk to everyone like this? But you couldn't say that at the time, because if you did, you'd have the whole room turn against you. So I just played along at this point to get through the play and then get out. As soon as I was done that play, I ghosted. I was never to be seen again.
You didn't tell her?
I didn't tell her.
Smart.
Yeah. I just was I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to be in resistance. I'm going to play along. I'm going to go visit her in the hospital. And she's saying, this play is the only thing keeping me alive. We have to do it. And I'm like, yeah, we're totally going to do it. I'm going to get my money back. But I'm at the time, at the time I was also dating my now husband. And so I had all this other fun stuff going on.
Oh, that's really key. That's a really key point, because almost
That's very
everyone that
key.
we know who gets out has something else to go to. You know, when people have made the thing, whatever it is, the class, the work, the cult, the group, the religion, their life, and they don't have anything else, they stick with it because where else are you going to go?
You're going to lose all your friends. You're going to lose all of your community. And for me at the time, I was like, I want to get out of this because it's so toxic to be berated. You know, even like some really big actors at the time, and I'm not going to name names, they were getting like their butt handed to them in class. And it's like, for what? Give me an acting note. Don't give me a life note. Tell me how I can make this scene better. Don't tell me that I'm gay. Don't tell me that I want to suck a married man's dick. Like, how is that going to help me? How is that going to help my acting? We're here to become better actors, right? We're here to book work and move on, not stay in this room and be berated over nonsense. So I just sort of like, it was really watching my scene partner who had just had a baby. She was nursing. She was like pumping milk between rehearsals. And she was a little baby. And Michelle doesn't understand what that means. And so she was like berating this actor. And she didn't remember her lines for this monologue. And it was like, you're causing my illness. You are the reason I'm going to need to go to Cedars Hospital.
It's a next level narcissism right there.
Next level insanity. Like, doesn't know her fucking lines. Get over it. Let's just rehearse.
Okay, so you ghosted. Did they ever try to reel you back in?
No, I was trying to reel people out. So there was one of her teachers, one of my closest friends previously, who I came down to Los Angeles with. I went to go pick him up from her studio. And I sat in my husband's truck and he came out to, I was going to drive, we were driving him to the airport. I was always like offering, helping, like trying to stay connected and not get into detail, but just try and help people like see how fucked up that area was, that studio. And so I went to go pick him up and she came out and I didn't expect her to. I didn't expect that she had the guts to come confront me. And she came out. She was like, oh, I heard you got married. Mm-hmm. Well, I called you to congratulate you. I was like, oh, really? I didn't get that call. Okay. I think she came out to test to see like where I was at. And I didn't get out of the truck to give her a hug. It was nothing. I was like, hey, what's up?
Did you get him out?
No, he's still deep in. Like this man he was married and then had another relationship with someone else. She really talked him out of all of that. And I mean, it's not my experience, so I can't really get into it. But I feel like looking at what has happened to him as a human being, he's a shell of what he used to be. And he no longer has his house and his wife and his dogs. He is completely subservient and doesn't look healthy. Looks like he could potentially like have lost way too much weight. The last time I saw him was about 4 years ago. He came to my mom's condo. I tried to get him a meal and I tried to sort of talk to him about where he was at because he had come out as gay, but didn't have a boyfriend and no experience in it. I'm like, well, maybe you're not, because it's a very weird situation. Anyway, I tried to get him a meal and he couldn't run out of there fast enough. And then he like deleted me on all of my social media and I never talked to him. But he's still very, very much in.
And you're still trying to get people out.
I'm not as active in trying to get people out. Like I did try and get Erin out, brought her over to my house and was trying to sort of chip away at it and talk to her about how much effort she was putting into the work, which really meant like commitment to the studio.
And just to highlight something in there, Alberta, I remember you were made to be seen as in such resistance.
Oh, after I left?
Yeah. When you left, I was afraid to be associated to you because I thought you were trying to destroy the work. In the room, you were jealous of Michelle. You were carrying darkness and all the things that your notes had been that we had watched you get. And then when you left, that stuck. It like carries with you like a cloud, you know? And then anything that you said that was ever against Michelle or the studio, in my mind, was more proof that you were trying to destroy something good. And even as that was in my head, I was still so afraid of going into the studio that I was calling you and you were generously answering the phone, as kind as you are and loving, truly one of the most loving people I know. And it actually makes me so sad to think that I was so terrified to go into my own acting class. I was calling you to ask you to coach me through the scene so I wouldn't go into the class and be tormented so deeply. And you would sit on the phone and generously try to help me understand things. Not about Michelle. You were trying to help me understand the scene so that I would go in there and not get berated as badly as you knew I was going to go in. And I can only imagine those phone calls were probably so heartbreaking for you, knowing that nobody should have to call somebody else to prep before going into an acting class.
You shouldn't need a support group for an acting class.
No, that's major red flag.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh, good for you, Alberta. You were such a key part in this whole thing. And I want to get back to your healing in a moment. But since we're on you now, Erin, what was your final straw? How did you end up leaving?
I went to a studio in Montreal for a session in Montreal, and one of the teachers that was working for Michelle and had been for a while, one of the things was she was so unwell as a human being in that class that she was laying on the floor at Michelle's feet like a dog for hours during the classes. And Michelle was treating her like a pet. And this woman was then our teacher as well. Michelle was teaching her how to be a teacher, even though this woman had been a teacher for a long time, but she was destroyed in that studio. And I had been in recovery for a few years at this time, and recovery had helped start to chip away at some of the stuff that I had been believing in Michelle's studio for so long. So that was one of the things that started to open something. But I made Michelle my higher power, which worked really well, paralleled to recovery. So it kind of worked and didn't work. Anyway, I was in Michelle's studio, and this teacher who was teaching was laying at Michelle's feet. And then in Montreal, she was the one doing teaching for 2 days. And then Michelle was coming in for 2 days. And the notes that this teacher gave me were so harsh, and I couldn't figure anything out. And I was in resistance every day, and I was torn apart and embarrassed and humiliated. And I just wanted to act this scene so badly because it was a very good scene. My partner was awesome, but I was wrong in everything. And then Michelle showed up in Montreal and gave me the opposite notes I had been given from this other teacher. So I had tried to adapt the notes that this teacher gave me, and then I tried to do it Michelle's way. So I was wrong. For 5 days, I was just wrong. Then Michelle turned to that teacher and said, "What was it you were telling me yesterday in our private conversation? Why is it you don't like Erin?" And this is in front of my entire class. And the teacher was taken off guard and then said, "Because she's a know-it-all and I'm a know-it-all. And I see that in myself. And she was a reflection of me." And so in that instance, this woman that was my teacher was turned against me personally. And the entire class, it felt like the entire class was against me in that time. And then I went on to New York and to Toronto and Jamaica. I think after that, I committed even harder, longer. So then cut to Toronto. I'm in a session in Toronto. And this is after Jamaica, where I'd done this amazing work and broken through all this stuff. And I was in Toronto doing a scene with the man that Michelle was dating at the time, the young student, young boy, I want to highlight, that she was in a relationship with, that we had spent hours in class having them be the focus of the class, about how their union was a beautiful thing and any judgment about it was blah, blah, blah. We were hijacked in the room talking about this relationship. And then I was in a scene with him and I was so exhausted. I was so broken down at this point. I was working as a nanny and as a caterer and everything to just try to pay for class. And I had been in intensive after intensive and class after class, committing, because now I was at the top of the third. So I did not want to let go of this. I finally felt like I was onto something. And I had started to see a therapist very rarely, just like around my recovery stuff. And this therapist asked, how long have you been in the studio? And I said, like 8 years at the time, or 9 years or something. And she said, is your career where you want it to be? And I said, what career? I'd never been asked that before. And she said, so you've been doing the same thing for 9 years and you haven't gotten to where you want to be? And I said, no. And she said, does that sound sane to you? And so the things that she was asking, she said, what would happen if you left? And I said, I don't understand your question. I just couldn't, but it was the questions that she started to ask. And then she tied it to a previous student who had left. He had been so messed up from that. So she said, this person's sounding really familiar. And then it ended up being a previous student had been in who was getting therapy about Michelle's trauma that she caused him. I was on my bike after one of these sessions. My brain started to not function and I couldn't make decisions. I was like in anxiety and depression and just on edge. I was hyper vigilant. I felt like I was being watched. I was living with acting students for 2 years at that point, and they were monitors in the class. So they would tell her stuff. So it was like being in prison with how they're built to always look at you. Prison buildings, that's what my life was for 2 years in Toronto. So I was on my bike and I had gotten a coffee and a water and I had bags on me and I was riding downhill and I was so out of it. I didn't even stop to think, how am I going to stop at this intersection of moving cars? And I just went through the intersection, jumped off the bike, fell all over. And the fact that I didn't get hit by a car or die in that scenario, still, I look back, blows my mind. And then I was in this intensive with her boyfriend as my scene study partner, and I couldn't take it. Something snapped because of the notes that I received in that studio. And I went home and I couldn't get out of bed for like 3 days. And I pulled out of the next class. And how you said there's always something to go to, I had somehow miraculously, in those 3 days that I couldn't get out of bed, I was just crying and I couldn't turn to anyone. And I just felt so alone. It felt like somebody put a fork in my brain and I couldn't think anymore. An agent from Vancouver reached out to me, someone that I had wanted to work with for a long time. She reached out to me and said, I just had a spot on my roster open up and I wanted to invite you out to Vancouver if you want to work with me. And it's a big agent. And I was like, oh my God. So it was something that I had that let me pull out of that New York session. And I lost my money. And I remember calling Michelle and saying, I can't do the New York session. And she was so cold to me. Her boyfriend was on the phone with her on three-way with me while I was pulling out of this session. And we hung up the phone and I panicked after we got off the phone and I tried to call back. I probably called her back like 6 times because I was panicking and they didn't answer the phone. And thank God they didn't answer the phone, because I went through withdrawal, and I tell you, it was like drug withdrawal. I could not function for days, but having that agent to go to in Vancouver saved my life, I think. And I lost my entire community, and it's true, for years after. The people I'd lived with, I wasn't invited to their wedding. Nobody talked to me. I was totally alone in Vancouver, starting over.
Ugh, it's so awful, Erin. Shame on Michelle. Fuck. She just needs to be stopped. She should not be teaching people. She's hurting people. She's psychologically damaging so many people. Think of the people also who aren't willing to speak out like this, who just came for a few months and left and feel fucked up and don't know why. Thank you for sharing that. Brooke, what was your final?
So we kind of talked about before the orchestra, and I think I brought it up before that there was 1 month where Michelle was also a student, and so she was in the orchestra. And again, it's like the orchestra was like you're doing relaxation and you're finding tension and vocalizing it, but you can also either give people appraisal for oh, that was really honest what you just said, or you can call people out. And I found that it was more calling people out in my experience personally. I wasn't there for very long with the orchestra though. So she started calling me out on how she couldn't act because I was in the room. And I just froze because I was like, I'm sitting in a chair crying about Mary Had a Little Lamb. Like, I don't know what am I doing to you? I'm 22. And so anyways, that happened. That was really awkward. And I didn't know I just froze. Like, I literally just froze in my body, didn't know what to do, didn't really do the work very well. The coach that was trying to mediate the two of us, I think was also a little uncomfortable and didn't know how to handle it. So fast forward, we're done relaxation or the orchestra, we're sitting down, another scene is going up. It's another girl around my age, and she's not, quote unquote, doing the work. And so Michelle, who's not teaching, but decides to stop the room, and she goes, do you know why you're not doing the work? Because of Brooke. It's like, what did I do? I'm sitting in the audience. Like, what am I doing? So I'm like, what? And she was like, your attitude and your presence is like making room for this bad behavior. You are initiating it and encouraging it. And now you're facilitating other students to have this bad behavior about the work. And I just like froze. I was like, I don't understand. Because a month prior, I'd gotten all this praise and like gone to New York and was told how talented and brave I was. So I was just very confused. And there was a lot going in my brain. I was trying to memorize my lines and think about the notes from last week, and then trying to deal with why I was facilitating this other actor not doing the work. And then she kind of kept going off. And yeah, this is like a bit of a trigger warning, I guess. It's a bit of like a touchy, she said some really problematic things, and I'll try to word it in ways that aren't super problematic. But she basically said, she compared me to a terrorist group, and she said, you're no different than them. And she said, next week, you might as well just come in the room with a bomb strapped on yourself and blow us up and you up and everyone in it, because you're metaphorically and physically sucking the love and the talent and the art out of the room. She went on to like berate me like that for probably 20 minutes. And then again, similar thing, said that I was the one causing her physical pain. I was the one specifically making her ill. She couldn't do any art or work while I was in the room because I was sucking all the talent out of it, and then made everyone kind of vote if they agreed, and they all did. And I hadn't even done my scene yet. I was just sitting in the audience watching. And then we had a quick bathroom break, and she said, okay, you're up next. And I was just so like not even in my body. Like I remember like I'm just like watching this from above. And then I went to the washroom, and of course I didn't want to cry in front of her. I'm and still am very stubborn. So I kind of waited till we went to the washroom, and I just completely broke down in like hysterics. And another actor comforted me. And instead of saying like, wow, that was really messed up, they were like, you just have to move through this note. It was like, just accept it and like admit that you've messed up and like take responsibility for your part in it. And I was like, I didn't do anything. I'm also 22 years old, 23. Like, I don't understand what I'm doing so wrong to this woman in her 50s. So that was really strange to me too, because I was getting comforted, but in a way that was still my fault. So then I went up and did the scene, and I don't remember the scene at all. I remember it was bad. I remember just getting berated and just kind of like, I just have to kind of like what Alberta was saying, I just have to sit through this and like wait for it to be over and like hang tight. And then that was the second last week of that month. And the next week I went back, and I remember just like really trying to get her approval, and she wasn't making any eye contact with me. Like she stonewalled me. And I think I did this scene really bad again. She didn't give me any attention though. There was nothing. And then I came back to audit. So I took a few months off, and then I told some other friends who were actors who weren't in the class, and they were pointing out how so bad that was, how they're just, some of the actors are older than me too, and they're like, it's just so disappointing that this older woman is like taking down this young actress. Like they should be building you up and teaching you, not like you shouldn't be paying somebody to just be like tearing you down in ways that have nothing to do with acting. Like comparing me to a terrorist has nothing to do with my ability to act. And like if you don't like me, that's on you to like, I'm not taking your talent away. Anyway, so then I came back to audit a couple months later, because I think I didn't know where I was. I wasn't sure if I was going to leave forever or just for a bit. Like I had to go back and like be in the room one more time and see how it felt in my body. And she wasn't there in the class I audited, but the other teacher, he started calling me out too. He's like, I found it very interesting you chose the 1 week to come and audit when she's not here. Like you're afraid of her. And I was like, I don't know what week she's going to be here or not. She was like in and out of like other school or other locations. And I don't know, she's not here every week. But it was my fault that I came to one class, she wasn't there. And then they said, and something Michelle had been telling me too around that time was, I'm avoiding something and that I really need to face it. And once I take this note, it's going to change and radicalize my art. But she can't tell me what it is. So I have to keep paying to come back. And once I'm brave enough to admit it, the world will shift. There is still a part of my head that is like, did I mess up? And are the three of us in resistance right now because we're doing this?
I'm going to just tell you right now, you're not in resistance. You are in the face of, my opinion, a sociopathic, narcissistic fuck nugget. Allegedly.
Good wording.
Hey there, listener. Hope you're enjoying this episode and that you're remembering to hydrate, stretch, and unclench your jaws. Sometimes listening to conversations about heavy topics can really make you tighten up, you know? And remember, a little bit culty loves you. Also, come hang out with us on Patreon after you finish this episode. It's fun over there. Fun is good. And now, here's a brief message from our sponsors.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Brace yourself for something fuel-nominal. Unleaded 88 is the clear fuel choice. It's cheaper, cleaner, and greener. And it's grown by Iowa corn farmers. Now that's totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88.
Your critical thought is being called resistance. Now when you're thinking critically, you think it's resistance, but it's not. It's your critical thought. You have to recognize it as such again.
Which was so hard to do at 22. Like, it was incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Try 42.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that you said about the teacher, so those notes, what I found out recently, and part of why I wanted to do the podcast, why I agreed to it, because I didn't want to until the magazine article came out. And between that and talking to the hundreds of students that have come out that have been traumatized, and a lot of it has been validating from my own experience. It wasn't until the magazine came out and I talked to so many students that I was validated again. But the teacher thing, I talked to one of the teachers that was working for her. And I even talked about Montreal. And she said, yeah, Michelle was texting me notes and Zooming notes to us. Like, those teachers, most of it wasn't even coming from them. She was telling them what to say. And then she was coming in and giving us opposing notes, which means she was purposely fucking with our heads.
She was weaponizing
in a very deep way. That was one thing. And then also that LA studio that was 2 stories high. Do you remember it? We worked in, I don't know if either of you worked in that studio, but there was a studio in LA. It was 2 stories. We were in there for a while. Her bed was upstairs. She lived in this space and taught out of the bottom. So she would be sick up in bed, having this, in particular, this male teacher teaching downstairs, who that we all trusted. And to this day, I do want to make clear, I trust him and I adore him. And I think he's a very beautiful human being and a beautiful artist. And I hope the teachers don't carry too much shame and guilt about things, because I don't blame them at all. So I do want to have that said. He would be teaching us and she would be upstairs listening, judging his teaching. And she would come downstairs, hobble, her body would be like contorted. She'd be making sounds, that we'd have to hear in the quiet of the acting studio. She'd come downstairs to take over the class, to take over his teaching, to put him in place so that he knew he wasn't teaching hard enough and we were getting away with too much. And then we would be blamed for her sickness and illness, and the eventuality of her death was going to be on us because of our resistance.
Well, she's about to get a lot of resistance if she hasn't already.
Have you guys heard about how she's responded? Has anyone heard any rumors about how the articles affected her, or what's happening now that people are speaking out against her?
Well, she's currently in Italy, putting, I believe, 2 shows up in Italy. And I've actually had Italian actors contact me because she's going through the Italian actors now in the same way, and berating, giving weird life notes, having them cut their hair, all the same stuff. And she's fallen out with people and not wanted to pay people and not paid for theaters, moved to another theater. She's doing the same thing all over again, but she does have her core Canadians there with her, studying and working on stage in Italy.
And how many people are still active? Like, how many actors are in her little circle?
I think it's usually always around 20 or 30. I don't think that she ever gets much bigger. So it's not a huge cult, but it's a strong one. And her core have been there for over 15 years. Her core people, 2 of which were very good friends of mine, and I don't recognize who they are anymore.
And as a teacher, a lot of this stuff can sound middle of the road. Maybe, I don't know. When I hear it, I'm like, whoa, that was me. But as a teacher now, I've been a teacher for 7 years, doing a lot of therapy to get over everything from the studio, a lot of therapy. Some of the resources that you've posted, Sarah, have helped me to the therapy resources, to getting out of a narcissistic relationship. And as a teacher, I feel that line every time I teach. If I go over this line, if I say this note, I'm taking away this person's power, or I am disempowering them, or I'm going into a place that's personal instead of about acting. I never cross that line. It's like a very icky feeling to get even close to that line. So the fact that she crossed it every time she taught to every student, month after month after month, is very alarming, that she doesn't have a conscience that stops her from that. That is a huge red flag.
It's not how those people work. They're soul collectors.
Leveraging people's honest efforts and values and idealism for her own gain. And that's the lie.
I was just going to add to what Alberta was saying too. It is a smaller cult. I think the thing that's been the most interesting is just learning the generations of people and how many people. Like, I lived in Toronto when I went there, and it was, obviously people in Toronto knew about it because I was there. And then I moved back to Vancouver, and like my current acting coaches are affected by this, and their peers. I have a friend who is an intimacy coach who knows about it in their 60s. And I'm like, this is crazy. It's generations. Like, it's people that are my parents' age to mine that are younger that are affected throughout Canada. I mean, I could throw a stone and like 5 people would be like, yeah, I've heard of her. My friend went there. That was one of the most mind-blowing things after the article came out, was the people that had reached out. And then some of my teachers, when I went to film school, are like reaching out too and being like, yeah, I had a bad time with that person too. And I was like, that's crazy. The people that taught me in school. So it is small, but it's also incredibly large at the same time.
25 students teaching for 25 years, and not the same 25 or 30 students. It's been, decades of this. And, if only it were just about the acting.
Right.
Right.
It's not.
I've got co-teachers, like very, very good artists. It makes me sad to think about the incredible artists that are carrying so much shame and guilt around things that they've done to other students in the room and as teachers and into their families. Like, I missed my cousin's wedding because I couldn't miss an acting class because I would be not committed enough. And that is big life stuff that students are missing because they are being fucked with in their heads for this person.
That's really good advice, actually, for people listening who are not sure. What other advice would you guys have for people who are in acting class or people who know kids or have kids in acting class? What are the major red flags to look out for? How do we keep people safe from teachers like this?
Something that I really like with my training doing art therapy is there is a big emphasis now in the therapy world on trauma-informed and person-centered. And that was something that I never had in that training before, being person-centered. So like, what do you feel like? Putting the question back on them instead of being like, you have to say yes. I have a singing coach now, a voice coach, who is very person-centered, and it's never, I don't get berated if I like forgot something. It's not like I'm in resistance, and she'll ask her students questions, like just making sure that the student feels okay. And it's not, we're not just a product. Like, actors are not just a product to walk in and say lines. Like, they're people too. And you need to also check in with how they're doing instead of berating them for having a bad day and not being able to perform like a circus monkey. I think that's something that I would tell, like, an acting, somebody looking for acting, like check in with like how it's sitting in yourself instead of the coach telling you how it's sitting in yourself. And if it's so hard to have this beacon of truth being outside of you, that's not authentic. That's not true. You're your own beacon of truth, and you have to check in with that.
I think that's such a good point. The authority on your work, you've got to be the own authority, and yet you go to acting class to get feedback.
It's a fine line.
Well, the road to authenticity is what you said. It's internal, and their process ensures that you'll never reach it because you're always handing off your authenticity to someone else, and that's not really authentic.
So how do we have creative spaces that stretch you and that purposely put you in touch with your discomfort? Like, how do you create a safe space for that?
There's something in acting classes where you do need to tap into your trauma, and you do need to tap into your life experience. But voicing it in class as a sort of transactional collateral thing. That's not how you do it. Like, that's not how Larry Moss, who I mentioned in the other episode, Larry Moss was, there's a bit of a cult around him, but he would say, like, who is this person that did this? Don't say it. Don't name it. Feel it. Go there. So there was never a need to talk about it and to tell your trauma in front of these actors or pretend that you had trauma in order to appease her. That doesn't make any sense. You don't need to do that to become a better actor. You don't need to do that to tap in. But if you're not skilled at teaching, and if you're not actually teaching acting, if you're using it for a transactional purpose to have something over someone, then it's a totally different story. But in an acting class, it is not necessary to talk about your life, your sexuality, any of it. You put it in the work. You don't talk about it. So that's a red flag in an acting class. There should be limits on how much you are required to speak about your own personal life.
I also think like the opportunity to say no. If I'm giving a scene that's traumatic in a way that I don't want to process, like say I'm still dealing with addiction, for example. If I were an actor and I was given an audition from my agent that was an addiction or around that subject, I could say no. So it's like, why in a class do I have to do it? Why do I when I'm ready, I can work on that. But being forced to address something I'm not ready to process, my own trauma, that's not safe.
Also, who's to say that that necessarily makes you a better actor?
Another red flag would be the amount of effort and money you're expected to put into a situation. You can take a class for a month or 6 months or a year, whatever it is. I mean, I've studied with people for years and put in 30 hours of rehearsal, but I was never devoted to a studio or the community in a way where I had to raise money and do extracurricular work in order to get approval. So if you're expected to go to New York and you're expected to go to Italy and put all this money in, that's a red flag with an acting studio. If you're expected to pay all this money and follow this teacher around to other cities and countries and work illegally and whatnot, that's a huge red flag. Like, why do you have to do that?
Yeah. And then also never graduate.
Yeah. There's no ending.
Right. There's no ending. So we've spent 2 hours with these women and I'm enraged and impressed all at the same time. So we're going to do part 3 of what the aftermath has been like, what everyone's working on now, how the community is dealing with the bomb of that article. I also want to hear about what you thought of the article. Did it cover everything? What was missing? And we're going to save that for our 3rd episode with Alberta, Brooke, and Aaron. And we will meet up again and have a special episode that will be over on Patreon. We hope that you join us there. And we will focus on all of those things, the healing, the aftermath, and what you all thought of that article. In the interim, Alberta, if people want to reach out to you and they're hearing about this and maybe they're in Italy and they need support, what's the best way to reach you?
People have messaged me on just Instagram and Facebook Messenger. That's how the Italians found me, was Facebook Messenger. Social media.
Amazing. Because you're so out there publicly.
My name's in the article. Yeah, Alberta Bly, I was in there, and so they were able to find me. Yeah, so I'm talking with a really brave woman in Italy who is, spreading the article around to people who she's quote unquote lost to the studio. So she's alone right now with her and another woman.
The more fires they have to put out, the better. Yeah. And Brooke, where can people find you?
Yeah, people can find me on my Instagram as well. Alberta, did you drop your handle?
You can find me Alberta Bly on Facebook Messenger. Like, my social media is closed, but you can still contact me. Like, I don't have my page open for anyone to just look at my pictures, but you can still contact me there. So Alberta Bly, If they Google that, they'll find me. Yeah,
I've mainly been doing it on Instagram, but people are more than welcome to DM me as well as Instagram. My Instagram handle is just @babbling_Brooke. If anyone is interested.
Erin's having trouble getting back in. Let me just say this about her. She made a short dramatic film called 3 Days about this subject, and we'll put that in the show notes. And it's about an acting teacher and a psychiatrist in positions of power. It's really well done and beautifully shot and acted. Erin's quite remarkable in it, and I'd like to talk to her more about that. So we lost Erin to technical difficulties, but she just messaged me to say, and I think this is super important and a great note to end on, is that students should not ever feel that acting class is more important than it is. And that is so true. And it should never take the place of family and other important values for you. Or if you're ever torn between those two things, that's definitely a red flag. And we will 100% follow up with Erin and Brooke and Alberta in our 3rd episode about healing and the aftermath. Perhaps we'll even perform a scene from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in just do some relaxation together. I don't know. Like anything could happen.
Love it.
Yes. Or it's just some David Mamet, David Rabe, and, some Shanley. Those are the three things I remember seeing 20 years ago. A lot of people snorting fake cocaine off tables and
Sounds like a plan.
with their shirts off and dry humping each other. So on that note, same old, good old acting class. Happy to be out of that world, I have to say. Thank you all for sharing. Really appreciate you. To be in your position to speak out against someone who's so scary is very, very brave. And I'm a little scared too. So here we are. Appreciate y'all. Look forward to part 3. Till next time.
Thank you guys for sharing. This podcast is brought to you by Citizens of Sound, a podcast production agency committed to developing and launching shows with gravity and depth. From conception to launch, Citizens will partner with you every step of the way, whether you're an actor, business owner, doctor, fitness coach, hairstylist, or influencer. Connection is the future of communication. Jump on board with Citizens of Sound today and start your show. Go to citizensofsound.com and follow them on Instagram. And trust me, it'll be a really good decision for you. So I never felt completely comfortable in acting classes. And I always thought it was me. And
it may have been you.
It may have been. Well, it may have been. You joke, but that's kind of what it is. I would go into it. Yeah. It's a little bit of like, hey, I don't like the tactics going on here. I don't like the culture. It just didn't feel like, and it was hard, but you also wanted to get better. You wanted to have a weight room, so to speak. You want to have a training lab. And with stuff like this, it's always ripe for, you're not doing the work or something like that. And then eventually when it felt like it got too past the boundary, I wasn't comfortable, I'd peace out.
I still find it so wild that I also pieced out from Michelle's class in the early 2000s. This is like 3 years before I got into NXIVM. I think it's just wild like that.
Well,
that I could feel that. I think there wasn't enough of a structure for me or like a thing that I could see that I'd be striving towards. Like with
also,
the strike path.
NXIVM wasn't abusive at first.
That's true. And I also was like, there was no, you can have this. There was no thing to strive for except for her, like gold star from her approval. And I really didn't like her that much.
Well, there you go.
So that saved me. And then just like other people came to information nights to NXIVM, and were like, yeah, it's just not my thing. I don't like it enough to pay that much
and they
money.
might not even have language as to why they didn't like it.
Right.
Because our intros didn't really have a lot to object to except this.
Our intros for the 5-day, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some people be like, oh, I feel uncomfortable with how much everyone's so into it. Yeah. Or I feel uncomfortable with them. They wouldn't have said, I feel love bombed, but they're like, oh, everyone's so happy.
Anyway, it just goes to fortify the theme of our podcast. It's that culty behaviors aren't proprietary to cult. Abuses of power aren't proprietary to cults. They're everywhere. And thank you guys for sharing your story. And we're going to keep this conversation going, right, Sarah? We're going to do a part 3 at some point, maybe a live thing on Patreon.
Come find us there and follow our brave ladies and give them some love on the social medias.
Social medias.
And we'll see you next week for Doth do.
Right.
For more good things.
All right.
Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know
Hope you like this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred. True story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.
That's the sound of your current hype level at the gas pump. But brace yourself for something fuel-nominal, because Unleaded 88 is about to take the hype to a whole new level. Unleaded 88 is cheaper, cleaner, and greener than regular unleaded. Plus, it's homegrown, making Unleaded 88 the clear choice at the pump and totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88, brought to you by Iowa Corn.